The elders' law was clear. No contact. No exceptions. For generations, it had stood unchallenged, etched into the minds of every Valari citizen as sacred. But laws don't stop ships from falling out of the sky. The fireball tore across the night, crashing into the blackened dunes just beyond the capital spires. No emergency response was launched. The orbital beacons detected a human signature. That was all the reason needed to not act. Let it burn. Let him die. That was the way. Salith knew that. She'd been trained in obedience since childhood. She knew the words, the warnings, the lessons drilled into every warrior. Humans were forbidden not because they were violent, but because they were dangerous in another way. Corrupting. Contagious. A single whisper from their lips could undo an empire. So when she stood at the crater's edge, her cloak flapping against scorched wind, she wasn't thinking of rebellion. She was thinking of discipline. Of legacy. Of rules. She should have turned back. Instead, she stepped closer. The wreckage hissed with heat. Shattered metal and twisted panels, all barely holding together. And at its heart, buried under scorched plating and flickering lights, was a figure, barely conscious, soaked in blood, coughing with each breath. A human male. Alone. Dying. He looked at her. Didn't speak. Just held her gaze. Salith's hand hovered over her calm. One press, and the elders would take care of this. One press, and she'd be doing her duty. But her finger never moved. Because in that moment she didn't see a threat. She saw pain. Not the kind that comes from broken ribs or burned skin, but the kind that lives behind the eyes. Quiet, enduring pain. And against every rule, every warning etched into her blood, she knelt. She dragged him out with her bare hands, searing her palms. She hid him in the old burial caverns no longer visited, bringing him food stolen from her own rations. She studied ancient first aid texts, sneaking through restricted archives meant for scholars. No one knew. Not yet. Each day he faded a little less. His name was Callan. And though his body remained broken, his spirit did not. His eyes searched everything. His mind never stopped. He never once begged. That's what unnerved her most. In silence, she watched the man the elders feared more than any beast or warlord, and couldn't understand it. What was it about him that scared them? He could barely speak her language. Could barely breathe without wincing. And yet, there was something in him. Something steady. A weight in his presence that refused to yield. Something human. And Salith realized the truth slowly, painfully. The law didn't exist to protect them from humans. It existed to protect the elders from change. Because the human didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand. He didn't plead. He didn't manipulate. He just existed. Authentically. Unapologetically. Even broken and stranded, his sense of self was unshakable. And she envied that. She began to question. Quietly at first. Then not so quietly. Why was compassion forbidden? Why was one kind act treated like treason? Why were they told not to feel? Not to think? The law had always been above question. Until she met someone who had never obeyed it. And still lived. Still loved. Still mattered. That's when it began, the unraveling. Not of the law, not yet. But of her belief in it. It started the moment she chose to let a forbidden creature live. Salith had thought the hardest part would be saving him. It wasn't. The hardest part was the questions. Callan's survival wasn't a miracle. It was a testament to human resilience. He had lived when no one thought he would, fought back the fever, and made it through the endless pain that should have broken him. But what unnerved her most wasn't his strength, it was his curiosity. His ability to see the world through new eyes, to question everything. "Why do you all obey without asking why?" he asked one evening, his voice hoarse from the days of silence. "How do you live with it?" Salith paused, trying to find the words to explain the order she had been raised to follow. The law. The code. The elders. She had never questioned any of it. That was how the world worked. But he had the audacity to ask why. "I never thought to ask," she replied, struggling with the honesty of her own words. He looked at her, a weak smile breaking across his face. "That's the problem. You don't think you follow. And they've taught you to be afraid of your own thoughts." His words cut deep. Salith had spent her life living by the law, respecting the elders' wisdom without ever considering that there might be another way. But the more she spoke with him, the more she saw what he meant. His eyes, his stories, the way he carried himself, it wasn't just that humans survived, it was that they never gave up on the possibility of change. He spoke of Earth, of humanity's endless wars, yes, but also of their ability to overcome them, to evolve, to reshape their destiny again and again. They hadn't surrendered to fear. They had learned from it, grown from it. And the more he shared, the more she began to see what the elders had truly feared. It wasn't that humans were violent. It was that they had the power to inspire defiance. In others. In entire species. They made others ask questions. They made people challenge their own authority, their own power structures. They were the spark that set fire to the kindling of revolution. And Salith had caught that spark. "I'm not afraid of you," she told him one night. "I'm afraid of what your presence means." Callan's laugh was quiet but genuine. "That's because you know it's true. Humans don't conquer the galaxy with weapons or armies. We do it with ideas. We make people believe in something else." She couldn't shake it. The words replayed in her mind long after he had fallen asleep, his breathing steady but faint. Salith wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of the possibility he represented. The possibility that everything she had been taught was a lie. That the law wasn't a tool of peace, but a tool of control. And in the dead of night, Salith made a decision. She would take him to the council. Not to betray him, but to make them see. She didn't know how or why, but she needed them to see what she had learned. That humans weren't a threat to their world. They were a catalyst. A change agent. A force that made everyone else ask the one question no one ever dared: what if there's another way? The truth was, the elders didn't fear humans because of their strength. They feared them because they couldn't control what they made others believe. The moment the elders discovered her betrayal, everything she had believed in shattered. Salith stood before them, the weight of their gaze pressing down on her like 1,000 suns. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. The punishment was already decided. Her fate was sealed the moment they found the human alive, healed, and still by her side. She had betrayed them, violated the most sacred law of the galaxy. And for that, she would be punished. "What do you have to say for yourself?" The eldest spoke, his voice cold, ancient, full of the authority that had ruled their world for millennia. Salith didn't flinch. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. Yet nothing could prepare her for the weight of the truth she was about to speak. "I saved him," she said, her voice steady but firm. "And in doing so, I've seen something you refuse to acknowledge. The law was never meant to protect us from humans. It was meant to protect you from change." The elders were silent. She had crossed a line that no one, not even the most rebellious warriors, had dared to approach. They had always feared the power humans held over others. But they had never realized that the true danger wasn't in the humans themselves, it was in the idea of a human. A force that could not be contained, controlled, or subdued. One of the elders spoke, his tone sharp with disbelief. "You have been influenced by him. A mere human. You speak of rebellion, of defiance. Do you not see the chaos that would come from such thoughts?" Salith didn't hesitate. "I see the truth. Your truth. And I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm not afraid of what he represents. The truth that humanity inspires change. You're not afraid of their violence, elders. You're afraid of what happens when people, your people, start to think for themselves." They didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. The elders had built their empire on control, on maintaining the status quo, on keeping everyone in their place. But Salith had learned something fundamental from Callan. Something they could never accept. "I am guilty," she said quietly. Guilty of seeing beyond the walls you've built. Guilty of believing that something different could exist. And with that, her punishment was clear: exile. To the void moon, a desolate place where no one survived. No one except those the galaxy had cast away, those who dared challenge the established order. But Salith wasn't afraid. Because she had learned the one truth that made everything else irrelevant: change always finds a way. Callan wasn't going to leave her to die alone. He refused. "Don't you see?" he said, when the guards came to take her. "I didn't choose this. But I'm not leaving you behind. You've taught me something. No one should be alone in their fight. And this fight isn't over." The elders warned him. They threatened him with death, with the complete erasure of his existence. But it didn't matter. He stayed by her side, even when all hope seemed lost. They would face whatever awaited them, together. They didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear: the galaxy was about to change, and there was no stopping it. Because in that moment, two exiles, one human, one Valari, had become something more than the sum of their parts. They had become the beginning of something new. And the elders knew, deep down, that they had just made a grave mistake. The galaxy was about to wake up. And it was no longer their empire that would control the future. It was the ones who dared to ask, the ones who refused to remain silent. The ones who believed that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. The rebellion didn't begin with an explosion or a battle. It didn't start with soldiers or weapons or tactics. It started with a whisper. Salith and Callan were exiled to the void moon, a barren rock surrounded by nothing but darkness. But as the days passed, something changed. The other exiles, those abandoned by the Empire, those forgotten by the galaxy, started listening. They came to Salith. Quietly. Hesitantly. And each one asked the same question. "Is it true? Can we really change?" The seed of doubt had been planted. And once it took root, it spread like wildfire. At first, they were a small group. Salith, Callan, and a few others who refused to accept that the Empire's laws had to be the final word. But as the days wore on, more joined them. Some came out of curiosity, others out of fear. They didn't know what they were fighting for yet, but they knew what they were fighting against: the suffocating grip of a system that had kept them in line for far too long. One by one, they realized the same thing Salith had learned. The law wasn't a shield, it was a cage. And the human who had defied it, not through violence but through sheer belief in the possibility of change, had become their symbol. Not because of what he could do, but because of what he had already done, inspired others to see beyond their chains. The galaxy, once peaceful under the Elders' rule, was starting to crack. Quietly at first. Then louder. A rebellion was rising, but not in the way the Empire expected. It wasn't about military might or aggressive conquests. It was about ideas, the kind of ideas that humans were uniquely capable of spreading. The idea that one voice could change the course of history. The idea that a single spark could set the galaxy on fire. Across the stars, captains and leaders from every corner of the galaxy began to whisper about the humans they'd met, the humans they'd worked with. They started to wonder, what if we had one of them on our crew? It wasn't about using humans as weapons or pawns. It wasn't about military advantage. It was about something far deeper, the human's ability to awaken something in others. They made you question everything. Your beliefs. Your loyalties. Your understanding of what was possible. The ships that had once been tools of the Empire now carried humans with them. Not just as soldiers, but as catalysts. They didn't follow orders. They didn't obey the rules. They broke them. And in doing so, they opened the eyes of the people around them to a new way of thinking, a new way of being. The elders didn't understand it. They couldn't. They still believed that control was the key to keeping the galaxy in line. But they couldn't stop the change that was already happening. The rebellion had begun in the hearts of the exiles, but it was spreading to every corner of the galaxy, from the lowest ranks to the highest. Callan and Salith became legends. They were no longer just two outcasts. They were the embodiment of everything the galaxy had feared, the power of a single human to change the course of history. Their defiance, their unity, became a rallying cry. And as more joined their cause, as more humans were brought onto ships and into crews, the galaxy's once unshakable foundations began to tremble. The elders could no longer control the narrative. The fear they had worked so hard to instill in others had been turned against them. The very thing they had feared most had come to pass. They had feared that humans would inspire rebellion, and now they were reaping the consequences of that fear. It wasn't a violent uprising. It wasn't a war. It was a quiet, insidious revolution. And it all began with one simple truth: you want a human on your crew. Not for their strength, not for their technology, but for what they bring. The ability to make others see beyond what they've always known. The ability to inspire others to believe in something more than the chains they've been given. The galaxy was no longer the elders to command. The people had learned from the humans, and now they knew one thing for certain: freedom was not a law. It was a choice. And the revolution had just begun.